everybody, Magpie here. Welcome back to 10 Things in the Light Novel that the anime missed for Ascendance of a Bookworm Part 2, Volume 2. In the previous volume, which covered Season 2, Episode 1 through 6, we were introduced to a totally different world than that which we've come to find so familiar, the temple. Part 2, Volume 2 finishes out Season 2, covering the events in Episodes 7 to 12 of the anime. This volume introduces us to Mind's new retainers, Wilma and Rosina, and we get to read all about the creation of the children's Bibles. We also get further insights into the noble world as Mind begins her noble's training, and when she joins the Knight's Order on a Trombe extermination. This volume culminates with an event of epic proportions, a showdown where Mind displays the full extent of her magical power, shocking everyone there, and leading to Ferdinand delving into her past with the help of a magical tool where he learns about Mind's past life as Urano. The anime covered the events in this volume pretty well, for the most part, but just like any book adaptation, many things got left out. In this video, I will share with you my pick of 10 things in the light novel that didn't make it into the anime. The one thing I will not be covering from this volume is Mind's dream world, as I have already made a video that's entirely devoted to covering the dream sequence. I'm gonna place the link in the description and recommend you check it out since the anime cut out so much of what makes this part so funny and wholesome. Okay, let's start. One aspect of the story that the anime doesn't really focus on is just how seriously Benno and Mind are preparing for the opening of the Italian restaurant. Whole chapters are devoted to the various challenges that it poses and how they deal with them. From the construction, the interior decoration, training of waiters and such, there's quite a bit that the anime missed. During this time in the story, Benno is very concerned about the interior decoration of the restaurant since they're going for an eatery that feels like a place that nobles would use. He has limited knowledge of what the interior of a noble's dining hall looks like, and they are not yet sure on how Mind's food would compare to that of nobility. To address the first point, he has Mind tour the restaurant during the construction as an excuse to have her attendants, Fran and Rosina, give the place a look and offer suggestions. After all, both of them are well acquainted with noble customs and lifestyles, and thus can offer their input on the restaurant's decoration, tableware, linens, and so on. Rosina dominated the discussion when it came to art that could be displayed and how to present it, while Fran offered less expensive alternatives to her suggestions, gently holding her back when she suggested something too extravagant for a restaurant. Additionally, Fran gave valuable insight on how to deal with the tableware, saying that most rich people owned their own and could bring their own fancy dishes to show off if they wanted to. He also recommended that they skip tablecloths, which people generally used in this world to rub food off their hands, wipe their face, and even blow their nose. Yuck! He suggested that they use individual napkins instead, since that was a practice that nobles were now adapting, and saying how it would be an important step toward feeling more like somewhere a noble might eat. Meanwhile, Mind's contribution was saying that nothing would complete the restaurant aesthetic more than a bookshelf in the corner, making Benno glare at her angrily, and Rosina and Fran chide her for such a suggestion. Her only idea was then totally rejected, which actually hurt her feelings a little. But her contribution was not nil, for if it hadn't been for her having excellent retainers and making it so they could go out of the temple and freely give their opinions, they would never have received such valuable information for the restaurant. And their opinions were really valid too, because not only did they give advice from the perspective of nobles, but from the perspective of those serving the nobles as well. Cheer up, Mind. Maybe one day someone will, at your request, install a bookshelf in a common area for you to delight over. Now, another concern they had to discuss was about the food they were planning to serve. Neither Benno or Mind had any idea how nobility ate and had no baseline of comparison. Thankfully, Mind knows one noble and is able to get him to invite her to lunch. Mine had a basic idea of what to expect of a true noble meal from her experiences at the Guildmaster's house and eating their high-class food. But the meal she got to enjoy with Ferdinand was on an entirely different level. The meals all followed a basic flow of what you would expect from a high-class restaurant, starting with drinks, then appetizers, soup, the main course, fruit, and ending with a dessert and an after-meal tea. Being a meal fit for nobility, she noticed that a major difference was not only the quality of food, but also in the vast quantity of each dish. While it is important to note that the large quantity of food was because the leftovers are given to attendants and subsequently passed down to the orphanage as the grace of the gods, this lunch was still pretty substantial. There were a total of 8 different dishes just for the appetizers. Mine knew that she would only get full with eating appetizers if she wasn't careful, and only tried 3 to save room for the food. Thankfully, as Mine ate, she saw that, in terms of taste, the recipes that she created were just as good as those she ate with Ferdinand, though they would need some work in the presentation department. That said, Mine does notice that the soup nobles ate was the same bland stuff everyone else ate. It's stated multiple times throughout the light novels that the typical way of making soup is to actually throw away the broth that is created while boiling the vegetables, which leads to a much less tasty soup. We learn in this volume that the people of this world tossed away the broth after boiling vegetables in it because they believed consuming it would lead to miscarriages or even infertility. So everyone's soups tended to taste bland, even that of the nobility. Finally, not only was Mine able to judge the food during that lunch with Ferdinand, but she also had a good look at what the service was like, noticing that gray-robed attendants would make excellent waiters, and eventually plans for gray-robed attendants in the orphanage to help train the new waiters Benno hires for the Italian restaurant. Upon completion of the children's Bible, Mine gives a copy to Benno and another to Ferdinand. When she gave him his book, Benno said that his head hurt at the thought of all the new things that she was making, but immediately shifted over to calculating prices and talking about her next book. In contrast, Ferdinand reacted way differently. Ferdinand is initially confused by what she had the audacity to call a book. He tells her that books are works of art. They must be beautiful, with gold and gems in their covers and their pages filled with color. This book has little value as art. You are wasting this high-quality art by leaving it in black and white. Add color. He takes an issue with the cover, repeatedly demanding details on how she managed to place flowers into the paper book cover, as this would be impossible with traditional parchment. Additionally, he is baffled by the amount of books that they created in such a short time. Mine tried to explain just how it all worked out, but was unable to make it clear to him, as he didn't have a grasp on how plant paper was made in the first place. It seems that, though Fran had been reporting what Mine and the workshop had been doing, he was unable to convey the vast changes Mine was bringing about with printing technology. Ferdinand was also quite shocked that she was able to actually make her own ink with the soot that was collected, as he had truly expected her to fail at that endeavor. Mine goes on to explain that she was able to create so many books because of the cheaper materials, such as plant paper and the ink the workshop was making. However, it is when she explains in detail how they went about printing 30 identical copies by making their own stencils that she managed to break our poor Ferdinand. About halfway through the explanation, Ferdinand stopped reacting at all, freezing up like a crashed computer so that Mine had to wave her hand in front of his eyes to see if he was still listening. He came back to life but gave a weary sigh, saying how Benno might have it harder than he thought, and voices his sympathy for Benno, who has to shoulder the heavy burden that comes along with being dragged about by Mine's highly valuable inventions, one after another. Ultimately, though, Benno is first and foremost a merchant and able to cope with the wild changes and products that Mine creates because he desires to turn a profit above all. Ferdinand, on the other hand, is left with having to ponder about the societal implications that the new technology will bring, and thus warns her to keep him informed about the next book, and tells her to report to him before making it. and Mine is like, cool, I have the script for my next book right here. And so Mine gives Ferdinand a test story from our own world to see how it would be received and to get his approval to print it. So let's backtrack a little. When Mine learned that she was going to be an older sister, she got super excited for the new baby's arrival and decided to make a picture book for them. And so, to find out what would be the best story that would appeal to children, she reads the children of the orphanage several stories she knows. Unfortunately, stories like The Three Little Piggies are confusing, as people in this world do not understand the concept of anthropomorphism, the attribution of human characteristics or behavior to animals. And Wilma doesn't know enough about life in the outside world to illustrate most things. While Mine settles on making an illustrated children's Bible, she also writes the manuscript for Cinderella, since it is a storybook that Wilma might be able to illustrate given her background as an attendant for a noble girl. Ferdinand takes a look at the Cinderella story Mine has written out and completely tears it apart. He thinks it's ridiculous that Mine would ever suggest that a commoner could marry a noble, let alone a member of royalty, and even suggests changing it so that she just ends up as a mistress. Mine doesn't take too kindly to Ferdinand taking away all of the hopes, the dreams, and the romance of the original story, only to be told by Mr. Grumpy Pants that dreams mean nothing and that she had to face reality. The magical aspects in Cinderella also had to be removed, as this is a real fantasy world with tangible magic in it, and the abracadabras or biddy-bee-baddy-bee-boops or whatever magical chants Mine had put in it didn't translate well in a world where magic and magic spells are a real thing. The whole scene is incredibly entertaining, but I especially love the line where Ferdinand calls out the bogus magic. Even though Cinderella ended up with little semblance of the original fairy tale, this is still a valuable learning lesson for Mine, since this is where we get the introduction of the tiered placement of nobles, lay nobles, med nobles, and arch nobles, which are low, middle, and high rank, respectively. She also learned that because she lives in an actual fantasy world with magic and such, the people there wouldn't look too kindly on her made-up fantasy stories, and she'd have to put more work into writing her stories than she had originally thought. In the end, we're left with the story of a med noble's daughter who was abused by her stepmother and was eventually lifted into high society, where the son of a small-time archduke fell in love with her. Unfortunately for Mine's story, Ferdinand doesn't even let her end it with a happily ever after, as he took it upon himself to explain the reality of what such a disastrous match would mean for the son. Once again, this chapter serves as a good reminder of how much of a divide there is in status in this world. Being a noble simply isn't enough. You must be one of proper status to have any chance at moving up the social ladder. In this world, a lay noble, like, say, Damiel, is on a completely different level to an archnoble. A lay noble like him would have no chance at ever marrying up to archnobility. But hey, at least he can still enjoy his Peru cakes in the meantime. One final thought about this chapter is how it sets up a plot point that will be revisited toward the end of the web novel, and that is upward mobility in an extremely rigid society. Despite having low-born origins, Mine, our heroine, is able to challenge these social norms. And I don't mean it through marriage like in your typical fairy tale, but rather through personal achievement, determination, and great sacrifice. And speaking of fairy tales and fairy tale characters, there's something about Sister Christine that gives off major fairy tale heroine vibes. Let's see. She was a beautiful and extraordinarily artistic girl that, in spite of being born of a mistress, had such a high amount of mana that her father wanted to formally take custody of her. So, this girl had a doting father? Check. Evil stepmother? Well, her father's first wife didn't want to take her in, and because of this woman, she was sent away to live in the temple for her own safety. So, yeah, check. We got an evil stepmother. Happily ever after? Well, in the end, Sister Christine was called back home because of the purge, and we learn later on in the light novels that she went to the Royal Academy as well and delighted her teachers with her harpspiel playing, so check, happily ever after. So she's basically a fairy tale heroine, right? Well, close, but no. See, not everyone had a happy ending. Her leaving meant that she left behind all her gray-robed attendants ripe for the picking, attendants like Wilma and Rosina and Jenny, who were cultured and beautiful and in danger of being taken to offer flowers. The reality of who Christine was is better shown in the story called The Attendant of an Apprentice Blue Shrine Maiden, which is a short story in Rosina's point of view. There, we learn about Christine's character, her habits, and her day-to-day life. And, well, long story short, she was totally a little princess. She would have her attendants wake her up by playing soft and beautiful music for her, and even after waking, she would remain in bed and request that Rosina play more songs, even while she got ready for the day. Sister Christine spent her days between the nobles' quarter, where she received the nobles' training and lessons, and the temple. And even in her temple chambers, there was an abundance of servants that would see to her every need. 2 servants sent in from home, 6 gray shrine maidens to appreciate art with, 4 gray priests that would handle chores and manual labor, and multiple cooks, helpers, and tutors to satisfy her every need, as opposed to what other blue priests and shrine maidens usually have, 5 attendants at the very best. In the light novel, it says that due to Christine's influence, Rosina had been living a life more cultured than even that of a lay noble daughter. It also says that Rosina was not only highly skilled at music, but was trained to be a very competent artist as well, and the same went for Wilma. Though her forte was art, when Mine heard Wilma play, she was floored by just how well she played, even though Wilma claimed that she was just an amateur. Lady Christine's philosophy was, look only at what's beautiful, listen only to beautiful sounds, hone your artistic senses, and she lived her life accordingly. She did not like to see or think about ugly, sordid things, and was very opinionated about them. In the web novel, we find a little extra information. Now, the web novel, by the way, has this chapter in a different point of view. It's through Wilma's point of view rather than Rosina's. We get additional information about Lady Christine's character that doesn't show up in the light novel. When Rosina goes to Wilma to complain and talk about the things that are expected of her now that she is Mine's attendant, she lists all her grievances, and Rosina dwells on Delia in particular and talks of how distasteful she finds her, not only because she called the harpspiel a noisy instrument and does not appreciate it, but because Delia's aspiration is to become a concubine. Rosina looked down on Delia in much the same way Christine would have had. Christine hated Grey Priestesses who offered flowers, and said, rather harshly, that flower offerings were for those who had no other merit or good things about them other than being women. Christine's noble upbringing did not let her empathize with the plight of others who were beneath her notice, and so she never understood that those lowly women she despised so much were not offering flowers for the fun of it, but rather sought to have a lifestyle where they wouldn't have to go hungry anymore. Rosina had that same kind of mentality and had much less empathy for less fortunate ones. In the web novel, Wilma tells her, hey, if you were in Delia's shoes, wouldn't you also cling to any means necessary to get out of the wretched basement? Rosina had recoiled at that question and begged her not to press the subject because the thought made her sick. And Wilma had noted that when they cleaned up the basement and when they'd been ordered to bathe the children there, Rosina had been the first to run away from the task and left it to Wilma, preparing to clean elsewhere. In the end of the story, Rosina sees the light. Mine is not Christine, and that's actually a good thing. Because had Sister Christine seen the sad state of the orphanage, she would have turned away in disgust and not lifted a finger to help. And, in my opinion, that's actually what makes Mine, not Christine, the true fairy tale heroine. Unlike Christine, who seemed to fit every item on the checklist, Mine was the one that cared enough to better the lives of those less fortunate than her, and is able to influence those around her to also see things in the same way she does. Like any good fairy tale heroine who has a heart of gold and must overcome many challenges, Mine does the same thing. And we are the lucky ones that get to follow her story as we read the next volumes and see her grow and come into her own, and use her resources to better not only her life, but those of others around her. And that's why we love our beautiful book gremlin. Now, I will continue with the next 5 items on the list in the next video. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the Bookworm world and the various interesting tidbits that just didn't make it into the anime. There's just so much more that we could talk about, so be sure to join me and watch part 2 of this video. Before I go, I just want to give a huge thank you to the people on the screen for their help putting this video together. And a huge shout out to Merlin. Merlin, also known as Toasty Fan on the Bookworm Discord, is actually behind many of the memes I put here, and he's also been a beta reader for some time. Merlin, you're so incredibly encouraging and supportive, and most of all, you always remind me to think about my health and not stress out about all the things I need to complete. Finally, you gifted me a Ferdinand fanfic on Archive of Our Own. That was freaking awesome and I absolutely loved it. And that's why you're an emerald. Emeralds are universally loved. They have long since been valued for their beauty and symbolism and adorn the crowns and jewels of many royals from the time of the pharaohs until today. They have also been used as talismans for good luck and to improve one's well-being. And much like you do for me, emeralds also bring a soothing mental and emotional equilibrium. I'm just so thankful for you. I am also thankful to all the people on the screen for their continued support. And if you'd like to appear here or get a personalized shout out, be sure to become a member on Ko-fi, where depending on the tier, you can also have access to many members-only benefits like early releases, outtake videos, read-alouds of some of the Bookworm chapters that I can't or haven't released here, beta reader access to all my scripts, and, well, I don't know if anybody would consider this a benefit, but heck, you can even slide into my DMs. Okay, enough chitter-chatter. I'll be back with another video soon. Until then, bye-bye.